You have to have some humility that you don't know everything, and it's okay. That's not making you vulnerable. That's not making you weak. It's like this kindness is weakness thing. Admitting that you don't know something is not a weakness. I see it very much as a strength because likely people know it already. People know it already. They just don't understand why you don't know it or why you won't acknowledge it. And that's not a great indicator of future success. And so just be humble enough to acknowledge that you might need someone on your board.
Hi, I'm Nick Warner. As a dad, a lucky husband, and as a business coach, I value people and relationships above all else. But next is winning, sustainability, and healthy culture. I've been a business owner for 25 years and served for decades as a special advisor to business and government leaders at all levels. Let's just say I've seen some stuff. My passion and my expertise are helping motivated professionals and businesses find the highest level confluence of what they want in life and business. This is what it feels like to be together at the top. Thank you to our sponsors, Scholl's Brick & Rogaski, Three Bridges Consulting, Kathy Olson at Ships and Trips, and Connect Strategies. Marcie Frost is the CEO of the California Public Employees Retirement System. CalPERS, as it's known, is the largest pension fund in America, with current assets just under $500 billion. To give you a sense of Marcie's scale, CalPERS paid $29.1 billion in benefits to more than 775,000 retirees last fiscal year. Marcie and her team oversee an annual operating budget of $1.8 billion with 2,800 professionals under her. Prior to joining CalPERS, Marcie spent 30 years as a public servant in Washington State, starting humbly and working her way all the way to the top in Washington, and now the fourth largest economy in the world, California. I have to say, Marcie, that was the best pre-production interview I've ever had, and I'm pretty sure I owe your executive assistant, Kara, an apology for how long we went. For me, it was a business school type experience. We're so excited to have the opportunity to learn from you today. Where are you today? And please say hello to the people at Together at the Top.
Yeah, good morning. Well, good morning, at least here in Sacramento, California. I'm actually sitting in my office and really looking forward to connecting with you again. I also enjoyed that pre-interview very much.
Thank you so much. So I don't want to waste 1 second. We only have you for an hour, and this is such a great opportunity. So if you're ready, let's roll.
Okay.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, let's do this. Let's start with your humble beginnings. Marcie, our listenership is made up of leaders and emerging leaders. And for those of us who've done well and essentially made it, your story may well help others see, or may help people running organizations see the playing field more broadly and look to engage people at all levels of the organization. You started this impressive journey as a single mom with no college degree, as I understand it, and as a temp in a 3-day typist assignment. Please tell us about your humble beginnings.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very small town on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. And for those of your listeners who have heard of the Twilight books, it was set in a little town called Forks, Washington. And that's where I spent much of my childhood. But after graduating high school, I got married right out of high school. I started having a family right outside of high school, a very young mom. But I also, I really knew that I wanted something different for my own family, for my daughters. And so I had a friend who worked in Olympia, Washington, obviously the capital of Washington State, and had been working for a government agency for some time. And she said, "Hey, I know you want to do something different. You want to relocate. And I've got, this idea for you." And so the idea was that this entity, it was called Department of Labor and Industries. They were in the year-end state agency softball tournament, and I could play softball, and they were looking for a female who could play second base for them. And the way to do that was I got hired for a 30-day emergency appointment as a typist. So I was a clerk typist too, and I could type. I took all those classes in high school. And so, really the 30 days was proving myself on the field as well as off the field that I can actually do what was, requested of me, which was also to perform on the job. And so that 30-day emergency appointment turned into a 9-month temporary appointment. And I've always been someone who's had a little bit of courage and pretty comfortable with risk taking. And so I relocated my daughters and we moved to Olympia, Washington on this promise of this 9-month temporary appointment. And that 9-month temporary appointment turned into a 30-year career in Washington State.
Amazing. It really is. I think about baseball. You're obviously are you still a good second baseman? Just out of curiosity.
I played until I was about 30 or so, and I knew at that time I needed to hang up the cleats, so to speak.
Yeah.
I was married to someone who was a very good softball player. He had played in single A baseball. He was a pitcher. And so, in order for us to play co-ed together, which is typically when I played, it was getting to the point that this is more than I can handle. But I played for a long time after that job started. But my son, he played baseball all the way through high school. He went to college playing baseball. So baseball, softball, really in the family genes.
Yeah, I mean, two things. One is I was going to make an analogy because in some ways you're like the end of the baseball season. They call up these AA and AAA pitchers and players, and they give them a shot. And every once in a while, one sticks and makes it and starts the next year and ends up an all star. There's a little bit of that, and then also sports is a conduit. I didn't expect to talk about this, but I was a basketball player growing up, and I got to tell you, early in my career, I cannot tell you how many games I got in as a 21-year-old with 35 and 40-year-olds who are like, hey, kid, come with us. And I got to know people. And not everybody can do that because not everybody's a second baseman like you are or a pretty decent basketball player like I was. But sports, it can be a conduit. You talked in pre production about how important it is who you work for. You said it's critically important to you. You mentioned the importance several times in several different ways in our pre production meeting, including you've agreed to lateral moves before just a follower join a great leader. Why are inspiring leaders so important to you, and why do you think it should matter to others in their career decisions?
Yes. So, the 30-year career that I had in Washington was really based on working for a number of wonderful leaders. And I think we've all learned from leaders, whether those are behaviors or systems that we don't want to repeat, or whether those are systems and behaviors that we think are going to be really successful to a team that you eventually manage or to your own success. So I learned pretty early in my career that following people who have the leadership approach that their job is to ensure that their team is successful, that will really pound the table for you when that next opportunity may arise. And so there were many times, including when I left the labor and industries, the workers' comp organization in Washington, and I moved over to the pension agency, I followed a leader to do that, someone who had been very supportive of me, given me opportunities to prove myself, put me in places that were uncomfortable at times to see if I could do it, and really giving me that opportunity to fail or succeed. And even, in those failures, what I learned, if things didn't go the way that I had originally intended them to go, there is this notion of being able to fail forward. So I'm someone asked me this question once: are you a hate to lose or a love to win? Got to choose one. I'm a hate to lose person because I dwell on that loss more than I celebrate the success, because I never want to make that same mistake twice. And to me, that is failing forward, that it's okay to make a mistake. And I'm really supportive of people taking risks and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, apply that learning and keep moving forward. And working for leaders who shared that same ideal or that same concept really helped me to stretch and grow. And you're right, I didn't have, and I still don't have, a formal college degree. So I always felt I had to work a little bit harder to be noticed, that my resume compared to a resume with someone who had a degree, I was coming in a bit disadvantaged. And the reputation that I was able to build and the leadership advocacy of the people who I worked for when those references were called is really how I maneuvered this career, or was able to navigate this career over 30 years. I've heard the term hustle culture, and some of the people coming into the workforce today, I've had some conversations with them about how is the hustle culture not a toxic thing. And my generation, and probably generations below me, we've worked really hard to be noticed. And the other, I think, leadership principle that was really baked in early was find the strengths in people, right? Don't focus on what someone does not have, a skill set they don't have, or the fact they didn't have a college degree, but what do they bring to the table? And how can I fully utilize that to get either a big problem solved or to get a success? And so this 30-year career, I worked for so many wonderful leaders, but I would say mentors and really allies and sponsors. And ally is a new term for me. I really have always called them sponsors. And sponsors are people who will use their own professional network. They put your name or their name behind you to say, this is the person you want doing that assignment. This is the person. I vouch for this person. And so I'm careful about who I sponsor. I'll do mentoring all day long, but I'm careful about who I sponsor, because that sponsorship is also a reflection of me. But I had those leaders who I developed that relationship. They were a mentor first and then turned into a sponsor just based on the fact that we were able to get some great successes along the way.
I've not heard that word sponsor used before. I like that. One of the things I've taken from you, and one of the reasons why I owe Kira apology, is because you use business language that is really of interest to me, and sponsors of interest to me. Let me go backward for a minute with your indulgence. You talked about the value of discomfort and failing forward. And I also asked you in pre production, is anything off limits? And you graciously said no. Tell me about an example of being uncomfortable and even failing forward, but failing. Tell us some of your experience there.
I'm a pretty energetic person and very competitive. You indicated you played sports in your lifetime, and it just creates either you have it, it's innate, or you learn it, by wanting to be held accountable to your team. And so I've always been a little competitive. I'm a hate to lose kind of person, as I said, and really just have this energy and passion to do things the right way. One of my early failures that I was coached on pretty quickly, and I took that very seriously and applied it, was that you have to be careful about how you win. And so there was a time where I was in a disagreement with someone else on a team, and we were working together to, solve a problem. And we got into this debate that was very unhealthy. The entire team was observing it. It even went into email back and forth to the point that bosses were being copied. And I just found myself wanting to engage that this isn't right. This is not the accurate way to portray what's going on. And I just kept engaging. And I think I knew better at the time, but I had a leader who I worked for who didn't say that was a really stupid thing you did. But she sat down with me and talked about passion and how to use passion and energy for healthy outcomes where people can actually hear you. And that passion is a good thing. But this was coaching from another female. But she said, a female having this passion that you're demonstrating is not the same as your male counterparts. Now, that was her experience. It wasn't necessarily my experience. That was her experience, is that you can't get so wrapped around the axle of winning or wrapped around the axle of winning that debate or making sure that your point is understood, that you fail to listen to understand what's really happening. So it was one of those listen to understand first before being seeking to be understood. I just had this very mature leader. She is the one who I went to the pension agency to follow. I just have a lot of respect for her and the experiences that she had. She was at end of career, I would say mid-career, early to mid-career. And, she just walked over to my desk right away and said, let's talk about what's going on. And so those kinds of failures, and I really did see that as a failure on my part. I owned that. And I think the other thing that I've learned through this career is don't be afraid to acknowledge when you aren't right. Don't continue fighting when you know that you're in the wrong. Be humble. Be humble enough to acknowledge that this did not go the way that you had intended. Sit down and talk to that other person. Apologize for your behaviors. Even if you don't get an apology in return, this is a reflection of you. You can only control your own behaviors. And so if you really do want that project to be successful at the end, it's the leadership behaviors that determine the culture of that team and the culture of that organization. And you have this responsibility to rein it in, even when you don't want to. So that was one, and I learned that one pretty early on, and it stuck with me for a very long time. And it's a lesson that I learned, and I didn't repeat that. I didn't repeat that same mistake. It's not that I haven't made other mistakes, but I certainly didn't repeat that same mistake. That feeling of, yes, I did this. I could have stopped this from going on as long as it had gone. That stays with me because that's that hate to lose mentality.
Yeah, I like what you said about saying sorry also. There's this notion like once you get where you are or once you get maybe where I am, that you have it all figured out and people say sorry to you. You saw that big silly smile I got on my face when we were talking. You know why? It wasn't a real smile, it was a wry smile because I said it this morning.
Yeah.
I called somebody back and said, I apologize. It's not important what it was, but I just want to say, no, I'm not super pleased with how I just handled that. And it was very gracious and was great, but I said sorry because I was wrong in that situation. I really respect that from you because there's a certain level people get to where I think they stop being introspective. You talked about positive feedback and getting feedback in certain situations, but you also mentioned learning things we don't want to repeat, which tells me you've had either leaders or bosses or people around you that are doing things, saying things, handling things in a way that are mentoring you in a different way of things you don't want to do. Give me an example or two of that where you saw, I'm not going to be that kind of leader. That does not work for me, Marcie Frost.
For every person you work with and for, there is something you can learn. And, many of those, fortunately for me, I've got to put in oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to, I'm going to take that one. And then there are some that are very, very impactful to your self-esteem, your confidence, certain styles that I now know through, I'm kind of an experiential learner who, where I experienced this in my own career and I would never, ever repeat this because I understand the impact that it had on me. But, there are people who are very strong technically. Some of the people who I've worked for who've taught me how to create management systems and how to do processes. And again, very technically strong, but very difficult on people, not fair to people, and not fair to understand that when people walk in the door of your company, they're bringing a whole bag of things with them. And you should not expect them to leave that bag at the door and only come in being like everyone else. That you're going to punch that clock and you're going to get the brain side, but you're not going to get any of the emotional side, the emotional intelligence, any of that mental part that really gets at engagement and productivity. People can't give you their full self if they don't bring their full self into your company. So I have worked for people who were very hard on others. And in particular, when I was the HR trade resource director and working through issues, personnel issues. And I always want to treat people the way that I would want to be treated in that similar situation. So every conversation I have is one of respect, but also very high accountability. So I have this style that is high support, but high accountability, that you have to make sure that people are being held accountable if they're not self accountable, because otherwise they don't get that opportunity to improve. Feedback is a gift, but it's only a gift if you deliver it in a way that they receive it as one. And so I just have worked with people who did not deliver those gifts in ways that people could hear it, that people were not giving fair opportunities to improve and change. I think everyone can change to a point. I think certain jobs have requirements that people have to decide whether they can adapt to those jobs or not. But if they're never given the opportunity to be coached and to improve, again, I think we talked about this in the pre-production, they have to be receptive to that. So checking that receptivity, am I someone who's humble enough to be able to receive coaching, to receive critical feedback, constructive feedback, and take it? Again, early on in my career, I was not as good at it as I am now. I still encourage feedback coming my way from my executive team, from my board, from anyone on the team who believes I could have done something differently.
From me in pre-production, you asked me a couple times what I thought about something. I was so struck by that. What are you asking me for? You're Marcie Frost. I was really impressed by the humility to ask, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think, we have to be lifelong learners. We don't know everything. We can't hire people who think and act exactly like we do. Otherwise, we're going to have, some corners that we're not seeing around. So I try to be very intentional about hiring people who have different experiences than I do. I want complementary skill sets. I don't want people who are wired exactly the same way I am. Again, I think you're doing a real disservice to your company because you're not going to make the best informed decisions if you don't have people who have different experiences. And so I think that's something I've been able to do with my own team. And as I look to hire, that's a critical success factor on how is that individual going to be complementary to the skills of the rest of the team. I've always been a lifelong learner, and I think that came early on. I was always a very avid reader. Moneyball was the first investment book that I read, and that was a referral from one of the investment experts on the Washington State Investment Board. When I first got on that board, I'm humble enough to say, I need help, right? I'm sitting on this board, I'm a trustee. I don't have an investing background, but I can learn. And so I just asked him, what books can I read? Can I use him to bounce ideas off of or to ask questions off of too? And, he immediately agreed and helped me the entire 4 years that I was up there. But the first investment book that he had given me to read was Moneyball, because he said, we want to take something that you know well, baseball, and something that you're trying to learn, and we'll put that into a single kind of book session between the two of us. And then I got 9 other books from him thereafter.
Yeah, really cool. I'm probably going to follow up with you on some of those books too. Moneyball goes right back to the top of my head. I have some other questions I want to get into about stability and retention, but let me just go what I think might be backward for 1 minute because you're bringing up some really interesting points. There was an article today in the Wall Street Journal, September 12th, 2023, that talked about reviews versus connecting and feedback versus feed forward. So feedback meaning I'm taking you backward, it's hard to hear. And obviously review versus connect, it's the same type of dynamic where we're trying to go forward, not backward. I got to tell you, I'm one day into processing this. I'm only a few hours. I read it this morning. I'm choking on feedback versus feed forward, but oftentimes I come around to things. What are your thoughts?
Hmm. No, I like it. I liken it really to this failing forward. Feedback is important to look at performance that may be in the rear view mirror. But if you're delivering that input to someone and they can't hear you because you're delivering it in a way that is not allowing them to keep their dignity, that is having them believe that everything they do is wrong. I mean, coaching is not about here's everything you did wrong. Coaching is about here's everything you're doing right. Now, let's talk about one thing that you believe you could do to improve performance even more. And 9 times out of 10, that individual knows exactly what they need to be working on without you telling them. But that allows people to keep their dignity, allows them to think about moving forward in the company, to continue that engagement, continue that productivity, which is important to us all. But they're doing it in a very high confidence way versus feeling like they've been beat up on. And I think that's probably what that article is referencing. I haven't had a chance to read it, but if you're giving people information to help them succeed in the future, I could see that being feed forward. Feedback sometimes feels like punishment and does not feel like coaching, does not feel like you're invested in this person's future performance and that you're there to help them. It just feels like, they're being beat up on a bit, and that doesn't feel good to anyone.
Yeah, this is really helpful. I got to tell you, and this is not me kissing up, although I certainly have it in me, especially as a 30-year lobbyist. I have it in me, but I'm not. Your language impacts me. The high support and high accountability. I'm a coach, as you know. That's what I do for a living. And so when I heard that from you, it's not the first time it's been said, but you said it in a way and in context that impacted me, and I've put that in play several times with my management clients. And also, it's really impactful me. Here, you say, it's important that you think you feel good about what you said, but could the person process that? So I'm glad I asked you about this. Like I said, I had kind of a negative reaction when I read the Wall Street Journal article, but I also thought I'm going to start asking people I trust and respect because I don't think I'm hearing this or reading this correctly. And right away, you've reset my head around it because our challenge as managers is to get it into folks' head in a way they can process. And I think feed forward is really interesting as opposed to feedback. We appreciate your time. If you like what you've heard so far, do me a favor and leave a 5-star review and share with your friends. We'll be right back. The law firm of Scholes, Brick, and Rogaski is a go-to partner for me. I work the most with partner Michael Rogaski. I go to them for business contracts, strategic legal counsel to maneuver through or around complex business situations, HR and employee issues, startup needs, intellectual property protections, collection matters, and recently the purchase or sale of a business. I really like the fact they tell me if they're not the best fit and they give me a warm referral if I need it. Also, unlike so many attorneys, are totally level-headed and calm. I've experienced it like their slogan says, small firm service, large firm result. Contact Michael Rogaski at sbrlawsd.com. Kathy Olson at Ships and Trips is as creative and as willing a travel partner as you can find. These days, you can plan a lot of trips on your own, but for those trips that require more intricate planning, tons of time, or local contacts and savvy, Kathy's the best. My family and friends have worked with her countless times in every travel country, setting, and season you can think of. Contact Kathy with a C at shipsandtripstravel.com. Let me switch gears on you, talk about stability and retention with your indulgence. You described in great detail, and frankly, I wish your team was on the call to hear how you talk about your team. But quite frankly, as I listen to more clips and you've been interviewed a lot, you talk a lot about your team. And it's really impressive. And you described how good your team is and how fortunate you are to have been able to keep them together. How do you keep good people and effective teams together? And how does what you reference a stay interview, how does a stay interview fit into that dynamic?
So I came to CalPERS in October of 2016. And for the most part, and we've had some minimal turnover, some of that needed turnover, and most just as promotional opportunities for people. But for the most part, the core of my team is still here 7 years later. And it's a team who I quickly understood, one, they have really passionate about the mission that we have at CalPERS, being able to deliver upon this promise that we have to public sector workers to have a secure financial future. That resonates with a lot of people. It resonates with me. My grandparents, my own upbringing was very, very humble. I saw my family members not having access to a pension. They were trying to live on personal savings and Social Security. So this mission orientation or this fire that we have to protect this system here at CalPERS so that we can pay these pension benefits to people who have really earned them doing high risk jobs. And so that's the first assessment is, do you have people on your team who resonate with the mission, who it's like fire in the belly to make this company or to make this entity successful? And if you don't, likely not the people you want on your team. I did that assessment pretty quickly, and it was quite clear that this team and a lot of tenure on the team really felt that fire about protecting the mission here at CalPERS. So over time, I think there's a leadership approach. We get to a certain part of our careers and we've learned a lot along the way. And we want that learning and that knowledge and that set of skills that we bring to the table. We want that to be respected by the people who are evaluating us, who are paying us. So the first thing I did is I worked really hard to understand what their backgrounds were, to understand what they get out of the job, what brings them happiness in this job, what brings them job satisfaction. And so I've gotten to know the team on a professional level, but I also spend the time to make sure I get to know the team on more of a personal level. Like, what's really important to you? And obviously family is important to me, family is important to my entire team. But I think what happened during the quarantine of the pandemic is people lost a little bit of connection to the employer, that loyalty that was really there, that if you were evaluating a job here versus a job there, you were thinking about what it meant to be working at CalPERS. When you're working from home, it doesn't feel as much like you're working for CalPERS. It felt more like you were this independent contractor. Sure, you had a relationship with your direct supervisor, maybe some of your team, but that was all done virtually. And what we saw over time is there was a bit of a disconnect to the organization and to the culture that we had worked really hard to create. So we also discovered that during our employee engagement survey, there were two things that scored lower than what we like to have seen. One was a sense of belonging, and the two was recognition. And the sense of belonging is really a retention factor. So, to what extent is this person going to be with this organization a year from now, 3 years from now? And a lot of that is highly dependent, one, on leadership, but two, the sense of belonging that they have. And I knew that our leaders were trying to reestablish that connection. And we have a lot of team members here who, again, have been here for a long time, but really high talent. Like, we work really hard to find the best talent. But once we find that talent, we want to be able to retain them. So teaching leaders, including myself, how to sit down with the team and tell them how important they are to the institution, to the organization, that we notice these things about you. And those could be small things, things that they might not think their leader would have noticed or recognized. But these stay interviews were really a concept that I had during this talent war, where we had a lot of inbound job offers coming to our team. And I worked really hard to make sure that team knew that I valued them, the organization valued them, the people sitting on the other side of the table, i.e., the rest of the team, really valued them. And what would be the reason that they would leave? And if I see you in succession, right? Do I see you in succession to the CEO? Do I see you in succession to a different management position? Started having those conversations with my own direct reports. Last week, we just launched the stay interview curriculum that we'll be delivering out to all of our leaders. And the immediate response has been really positive. That I think people want to know that their leaders notice their important work, the work that they really bring to your company every day. And if a leader isn't noticing it, you're at very high risk of that person, that team member leaving. And that risk became even more prominent after COVID. And we're still not out of COVID, but once we started returning into the office. In particular, when our organization has a return to office policy that is a bit different than some of the other state departments here in Sacramento. We are 3 days in the office, 2 days remote. Most of the other state departments are 2 days in the office and 3 days remote or full-time remote. So we've had a bit of calibration that's had to happen. And again, that high support, high accountability. My job is to make sure that people know what the policy is, how the policy was created, why it was created. I do these monthly. Now I did them weekly during the quarantine, but I do these monthly all employee webinars where they can give me live questions. Feels a little like a town hall, which I love. I love that people feel comfortable asking me tough questions. I think that's a real high indicator of culture and engagement, that people aren't afraid, because you can't have fear in your workplace. And I think that's another lesson that I learned is if you have leaders who are not supporting the team, or the team is afraid of their leader and what their leader may do to them, that fear, people will not take risks. And your company is not going to move forward. Your company is not going to grow without people feeling comfortable taking on risk. They're not going to take on risk if they think they're going to get in trouble. So, creating that culture where intelligent risk taking, it's not just being reckless about it, but we want people to use the data and the facts before them and make an intelligent, risk oriented decision because we trust them. We hired you for a reason. Now, it would be a real deficit on our part if we didn't use the skill set that we hired. So, again, to me, that was just another indicator that people were not fearful. And I think that was a really important part of the communication because people not only lost a sense of belonging, that connection was lost because they weren't hearing from anyone other than their direct supervisor and their team. And so the way that we tried to fill that gap was to do these weekly sessions. And those weekly sessions were very well attended. Three-quarters of the organization tuned in every week to hear what was going on and also be able to ask their questions. But having a different policy than many other public employers created a bit of a flight risk that we had to be really thoughtful about. And these stay interviews would be one of them, that they need to know that they're part of a succession, that their skill set is being acknowledged and recognized, and that their team leader knows exactly the value that they bring.
Anybody curious why I asked Marcie Frost to be on this podcast today? Probably not anymore. So interesting and so helpful. What's an example of some tough questions you've been asked? I love that forum. It's really unique, and you lead with your chin. I mean, you really make yourself vulnerable, so you have to mean it.
Yes.
Give me some example. You told me, I didn't finish my sentence before you said, ask me anything you want. So that gave me some indication. I told you I'm not a shock jock, but plenty of your employees are shock jocks. They have tough questions. What do you get asked?
So many of the questions. So a funny part of the questions, we'll start with the funny part, was about parking.
Sure.
So, employees pay for parking and, stopping the parking deduction and then restarting the parking deduction. Who has access to parking? We had a lot of parking questions. And so they were serious, right? They were serious, but there was no question too small or too big. And I think proving that was answering the parking questions that I got every week.
Well, and you wanted to know what people care about. They told you what they care about. It may not be always like the salary that's an important thing to people. And so you found that out. What's another example? Parking is a great one. I wouldn't have thought of it, but it makes sense.
Yeah, so that was the easier example. There were a lot of people who were really questioning the telework policy, the requirement of 3 days in the office, and asking me to show the data. And why wasn't I concerned about, because I'm a very strong champion for climate and climate technology being created to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I talk a lot about that on the other side of my job. So they were saying, well, how is requiring us to commute 3 days a week? Show me the proof that we're needed to be here 3 days a week versus being 2 days a week or full-time remote. And they were great questions. And what I knew is if I didn't know the answer to that question, I wasn't ready. We were not ready to make the decision. And so we had factored a lot of these questions in as the executive team when we were trying to determine what the best policy was. And obviously I had a chance to get input from a lot of people during these webcasts. So they challenged me a lot on that. And I welcomed those questions and gave me an opportunity to explain the why. The why is very important to people. And even the why they don't agree with, taking the time to explain it from, this viewpoint that I have. And your CEO needs to have a viewpoint about why something would work or not work and not make frivolous decisions because, I can. Those were some of the more, I would say, spicy questions where there was a lot of emotion about that. And I certainly understood it. And as we were returning in March of 2022, we were one of the earlier return to office organizations, really from anywhere, private sector, public sector, you name it. So there were some questions about whether I cared about people's safety and health, that coming into the office, they were not comfortable coming into the office, that they didn't feel that the pandemic was over. And there was a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear that was going on throughout this. And that fear was not misplaced. I tried to understand it to the best of my ability, but also trying to explain that, we are a people organization and we can't be successful without our teams working together. We are not independent contractors. We're not just managing to outcomes, that we can't put our best self forward without working as a team. And really what it came down to with the executive team and I is that about 60% of the work, when we look across the organization, about 60% of the work was work that people do together, bounce ideas off one another, change management, innovation, creativity, problem solving. That cannot be done in isolation. You don't have enough of a viewpoint in your current role to solve a problem that goes across the organization. So we need the people to work as a team. And the premise I had is, and it doesn't work well. I'm happy to debate that with someone if they want to, but I've never seen it work well from my own personal experience. Problem solving and real innovation happening on a Zoom call. I've never seen that. Zoom is great for check-ins. We use it for our daily huddles. The executive team and I have a daily huddle at 8:30 every morning. We are on Zoom. We're kind of brushing up on what people are working on and who needs to talk to whom. But beyond that, we meet in person to do the really important work of the organization. So I got challenged a lot about safety and health. I got challenged a lot about the policy and why. And then also we had put in, I'm a strong believer that you have to have management systems that people can self-manage in versus having a leader who is controlling that system or controlling the people. You have a management system that people can work within and hold themselves accountable. So we had put the management system in at all of the process levels, the big core processes across CalPERS. But what we hadn't put in is some of the KPIs at the individual and team levels.
Key performance indicator.
Yeah, key performance or key people indicators.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so this is about people and their contribution. So it also creates an opportunity where you can reward your performers because now you have all this data available to you. But the first year, each of the programs came before the executive team with their key people indicators or their key performance indicators that show really to answer three questions. So one is, how does the leader know that full-time work is assigned equitably across the team? Because our employee engagement survey also said that was not happening, that they felt like they were working harder than the person sitting across the aisle from them. So how does the leader know, not the employee, but how does the leader know that full-time work is assigned equitably? Two, how does the leader know that full-time work is being performed? And then three, how do we know the qualitative nature of that work? So each of the branch managers came in to the executive team over the course of a year. Our actuaries were first. They have an excellent system, by the way. They came in and answered the three questions based on the data that they had put together. And so we now have those KPIs for almost the entire organization. Some are continuing to mature and refine. But what that also does is it puts the data in front of the leader to know where to focus their time. Right. So rather than assuming that someone is underperforming and someone else is overperforming, they have all the data to say, okay, I've got full-time work assigned equally based on experience, tenure, et cetera. And I've got a performance issue. Like this person is not performing at the same level as this team member. So I need to dive into that. I need to sit down and talk to this person about what's going on. And sometimes that is just a personal issue that's momentary, right? That just passes. And sometimes that might be a training that's necessary for that individual, but it makes the leaders focus on where their time is needed most, again, versus just trying to assess that by looking across the aisle.
Or by feel, yeah. That's great. You mentioned family. I'd love to hear about the role of your family, even where stress intersects with family. You have a big job. You've had a big job for a long time. Tell me about family and however you want to tell that story.
Yes. So my family, it's the reason I do what I do. I said I was a very young mom. So a mom at 18 years of age, had another daughter pretty quickly thereafter. And then my son came about 6 years after that. And so I have three children. They're all grown, they're all married, and they all have children of their own. But at the time that I was considering this job, or this job was being presented to me by the headhunter, it was a family meeting time. I needed to sit down with them because I would be relocating from Washington, where they were all within a couple hours of me, and spent a lot of time with them, Sunday family dinners, et cetera. But I really needed their input. I needed their support more than their input. I needed to know that they were okay with me relocating to California and taking this job and what that might mean. And what that might mean has exactly played out. I do get to spend some time, but I certainly don't spend the amount of time that I used to. And that's appropriate. They have families of their own now. But they just said, Mom, you have to take this role. This is a great role for you. And I think in 2016, I didn't start here until October 3rd because my son was getting married and my daughter was having her second child. So they worked with me on a later start date, but everything I do is for my family. And I think also that's what gives you the courage to do some of the things that you do. But this is a big job, as you indicate, to do it the right way and to make sure that your team is taken care of, your board is taken care of, the stakeholders feel like they're being taken care of. There are a lot of hours in the day, but I enjoy it. And that's what I had to decide. Again, I'm an experiential learner. I had to decide, am I really going to enjoy this? And I can tell you, after 7 years, I still love it. I still look forward to coming into the office every day. I enjoy working on, whether those are problems that are happening at CalPERS or whether those are fun, new, innovative change management ideas that the team has. But it's a really fun job. We have great people here, people who are very motivated to the mission, who are fun, smart, and just being around that type of energy all day long, that vibe that gets created, you can't help to want to be a part of that. And so I haven't regretted this decision at any point. It's been tougher at some points than others, certainly. But I always knew that when I had a tough day, I can call my son. My son's also a bit in the pension business. I could call my daughter, who is a principal. She's got promoted to being a principal. I could call my other daughter, who's a designer. So I can use my kids as a cohort.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing all that. We appreciate your time. If you like what you've heard so far, do me a favor and leave a 5-star review and share with your friends. We'll be right back. Three Bridges Consulting did the video on the recently rebranded nickwarnerconsulting.com. I really love the video because it helps me sell by speaking directly to my prospective clients. Dennis and Sean at Three Bridges Consulting are high-level storytellers for the purpose of helping my prospective coaching clients understand what differentiates me from the pack. A recent new coaching client literally said to me, "You don't need to sell me, Nick. Your video sold me. I understand what you do and how you'd work with me as a client." That is a true story. You know I love that. Contact 3BC at threebridgesconsulting.co. Ken and his team at Connect Strategies head up my post-rebrand digital marketing campaign. I'm moving up the rankings for business coaches and consultants quickly. Connect is 20 years in the business, and I feel like they're really focused on my account. I refer business coaching clients to Connect too, and I get really good reports on result, professionalism, and drive. Thank you, Connect. Contact Ken at KNECHT Let's talk about working with board of directors. You mentioned staff. We've talked about family. We've talked about your coming up. We've talked about, well, we should talk more about your executive assistant. I actually wrote a memo on the importance of an executive assistant and the way I think that position should be used. It's a really important position and frankly should be one of the most powerful positions in most organizations.
Agreed.
I kind of got that from your executive assistant. But I'd like to hear about working with the board of directors. Also, chiefexecutive.net suggests 5 ways to create positive relationships with the board so you and your executives can effectively execute goals. I'm going to give you 5 quick things. I love your comment on this or anything you want to talk about. 1, understanding boundaries and defining roles between executive and board. Using your board of directors as a sounding board. Make use of their Rolodex. Organizations are dynamic entities requiring boards with flexibility, skill, and open minds. And then lastly, maintain a close relationship between the chairman or chairperson and the CEO. Please discuss, as they say.
Okay. Yes. So boundaries. So we have a 13-member board of directors, and most of them are not, investment experts or haven't done pension administration, have not run a healthcare plan, because we also are the second largest purchaser of healthcare besides federal government. So we've got 2 really important missions that we have here. And so the board, from my hire, there's 1 board member who was here at the time that I was hired. And so there has been fairly significant turnover on our board relative to our history. There's a lot of opportunity for us to really prove who we are and to establish those new relationships that I think it was number 5 about having a relationship with the board president. So the board president is the only one who was on the board when I was hired. I talk to Teresa Taylor on a daily basis. We are friendly, but also I would say that we are friends, but we know how to separate our roles. And we established that very, very early on. It's important that the board have governance policies and are very clear about the parts of the role or the parts of their role that have been delegated to us. And then equally important for us to show how that delegation is being used. That high level of transparency, because if you don't have that level of transparency, you don't have trust from the board, then that delegation is really at risk. And the delegation, the way that it's set up, works really well based on a number of factors, including best practices. But in order to hold on to that, you have to have a relationship with the board. You have to treat your board with respect. You have to give your board access, which I actually enjoy in my board. They're all really good people. Many of them come out of labor backgrounds. I've got the elected state treasurer, the elected state controller. I've got the California Human Resources Director on the board. I've got, the Palm Springs mayor on my board. And then I've got a lot of individuals who work in jobs. My board president was a tax collector at the Franchise Tax Board. That's her day job. But she's also a very strong leader in unions, in her union, SEIU 1000. So it's important, that relationship between the CEO and the board president, extremely important here at CalPERS. I know it's likely important everywhere, but that separation of the role isn't always there in public companies. As you know, sometimes it's the chair and CEO. We believe that those roles should be separate. And I think we're a great example of how it can work. It's not that we always agree, but we have this relationship that even when we disagree, there's respect for the other's opinion. And that's really been this relationship that's been established over 7 years, but also the frequency in which we talk. Standing board and Rolodex, absolutely. These people have, again, back to the team and complementary skill sets. This is a board that has a variety or varied backgrounds and experiences, and I don't share in some of those. So I would be really at a disservice to my own success or the system success here at CalPERS without talking to them about, well, have you ever had a time where this happened? Well, how would you approach, it's a legislative bill, and I'm having a conversation with the prior president of SEIU 1000, Yvonne Walker, who's the retiree representative, and just said, I don't know this particular legislator using the Rolodex. What can you tell me? What would work best to get our point across for me to listen to what she has to say? And she said, well, how can I, it's always, how can I help? But the moment that you don't ask for help, one, that's not the humility that's needed in a leader.
I just wrote that down and circled it while you were talking. To be honest with you, I wrote it down before you said it because that's how I'm hearing this.
Yeah, you have to have some humility that you don't know everything, and it's okay. That's not making you vulnerable. That's not making you weak. It's like this kindness is weakness thing. Admitting that you don't know something is not a weakness. I see it very much as a strength because likely people know it already. People know it already. They just don't understand why you don't know it or why you won't acknowledge it. And that's not a great indicator of future success. And so just be humble enough to acknowledge that you might need someone on your board, including on your board, not just your executive team, not just mentors that you might have, but your board comes with all of this vast knowledge and experience in their own right. So why wouldn't you use that when you can and when you need to?
You wouldn't because you're not humble and you're the CEO and you don't have to. That's the only reason I could think. That's the only irrational reason I can think of to not use your board in partnership is I know it all.
Yes. Or this delegated authority, which can come into play, is maybe they won't think I'm doing my job if I have to ask them how to do it.
I've also seen setups where the board, whoever the controlling faction or factions of the board are, and I guess it could come from the CEO, but it's more likely from the board. And I see this and I help coach through this at times. They set up a healthy tension on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I love that, but I understand why.
Yeah. As long as it's healthy. I mean, I've worked, even at this board, I've worked where it's not always been healthy tension. There's been some unhealthy tension. And I know I don't want to repeat that. The healthy tension is really important, I think, because we each have a role, but there's a line between our roles. And the board has the higher fire authority over the CEO. But they're not your supervisor. They're not your boss. They are the board of, directors who, by constitution, by the way, have all of the plenary authority to run this system, including setting contribution rates, determining investment policy. What they choose to delegate is based on the trust that they have of the CEO, the trust in the skill set, the trust that you're going to tell them the things that they need to know, that you're going to get to know them well enough to know the topics that are of great interest to them, and you're going to make sure that there are agenda items that fulfill their fiduciary duty and their duty for oversight, their duty for notification, their duty for information. That's how I want to be described. If you talk to one of my board members, that's how I would want to be described by them, is that I have a lot of passion about the organization and the mission, that everything I do is for the CalPERS member, which it is, and they have the information they need to fulfill their role. This fiduciary duty role is really important in a number of ways. Fiduciary duty also meaning every decision you make is based on the exclusive benefit of our 2 million members, but it also carries a personal financial burden if you have a group of people or a person who believes you made a decision that was not for the exclusive benefit of our 2 million members. That is a personal financial hardship if we were to be sued on breach of fiduciary duty. So they have this huge burden. They have the huge responsibility of oversight, and you have to respect that in these roles. And that's what I would want, the board to say is that I do respect their role and they have the information that they need to do their jobs appropriately.
Really good. And it's nice to actually learn from something that's, I'm sure it's not day to day ideal, but systemically it's good. Your results show. I've stayed away from getting into the financial markets, A, because I'd be pretending, and B, because it's well covered. But you beat the market. You guys have done really well organizationally. And so it's actually nice to be able to do a business study from a functional organization as opposed to, let's pick this apart. Hey, we're running toward the fourth quarter, I guess the ninth inning, if we're going to stay at baseball vernacular. You told me someone once said to you, congratulations on beating the system. You did that and you're doing that now. So that said, where do you still want to get better and where are you working on to improve personally?
That comment stuck with me. And it was right before COVID hit. I was out in Washington, D.C., doing some visits to congressional appointees as well as some of the staff. And it was one of the staffers who was walking me out who said, congratulations on beating the system, that you're not burdened with this $300,000 student loan debt that I have, right? So beating the system was, how did you get to be the CalPERS CEO without having all of this student loan? And anyway, but that's the context behind that. But, what I personally am working on, and I do this every year, I spend some time thinking about what were the things that I set out to do that I was actually able to get done, and did I get them done in a manner that I can be proud of, right? That I can be happy about. And then was there anything that happened that would have been a different outcome if I would have performed differently or behaved differently? And so what I am really continuing to work on is just having some patience. I'm a fairly patient person, but I think if people were to
I
describe
see me
me,
pointing at myself. Yes.
it would be patience to work through problems. So by the time you get 37 years into your career, likely you've seen a number of the same issues over and over. So you know the answer. You likely know the answer, but you're not coaching your team. You're not developing your team if you continue to tell them the answer. So for me, it's just patience of working through and developing. I call it a teaching hospital. We're a teaching hospital. We need to teach people how to do these things on their own because you're not always going to be in your role. You're not always going to be looking over their shoulder. You're not always going to be 10 feet away from them where they can ask the question. So I call it this kind of teaching hospital, is that we need to teach our team how to make the decisions that you would make based on your experience. So I'm working on that. That's an area for me that I continue to figure out techniques that would make that easier. And, when times are stressful, you tend to operate in your innate capacity, right? And go back to not being as patient. So even in times under stress where the decision needs to be made, you still have to have enough patience to work your team through it so that they have that learning opportunity that they can take and apply to future problems, future issues.
Yeah, really well said. I got a call this week from somebody who told me how much they really, really enjoy my podcast. And as I was saying, thank you, he said, I'm actually not done. I think for me, it's too long. He said, I like to go 20 minutes. And I said, I understand that. And a lot of people tell me they like longer. I really wish we had more time. This is so interesting. I cannot thank you enough. But I want to summarize. This is my favorite part. Actually, my favorite part is when you say yes and show up and we get to learn from you. But I want to summarize some of the things, and if the pattern holds, I'll be thinking about this for weeks and I'll get calls and texts for months saying, God, just listen to that podcast. It was so interesting. Land and expand. You took your first job, frankly, because of sports and because I guess you needed a job and could type, but you got in there and you landed and then you expanded. And I think that's a great thought for capable, motivated people. I put different words to it than to your story, but landing and expanding. Value of discomfort. You mentioned that at the beginning of the show. I think that's really, really important. When I would encourage me, and I'll tell you real honestly, I was nervous before this podcast. I've only met you on a pre-production. You're a big deal by any measure. You're humble, but you are a big deal. In fact, I really wanted to do well. I'm very earnest, and it's good to be uncomfortable because you know what I did? I prepared. That's how I bridged the gap of discomfort. I was in my office at Saturday morning writing notes, and yesterday morning writing notes, and today getting ready for the show. So you can put yourself in uncomfortable or discomfort situations and then study up. Bridge the gap by studying up and surrounding yourself with smart people. I really appreciated the discussion about failing forward and it's okay to make a mistake. And then you connecting that to this interesting discussion on language about reviews versus connecting and then falling back versus falling forward. You made a great point, which is they have to be able to hear you. You can feel great about what you said. That's not the point. I've had amazing meeting with governors, amazing meetings with my clients, with directors of Department of Finance or senators or CEOs. And when I call back to ask, hey, how do you think it went? It did not go the way we think it went. They did not process the way we thought they processed it. Same thing with discipline or reviews or failing forward. I mean, it matters as much how people heard that as it does how you meant it, I think. And I really take that from your comments. They have to be able to hear you.
Yeah.
Being right's overrated. You talked about saying sorry. I say all the time, I use different words. Being right's overrated. Okay, tough guy, you're right. And everybody around you's dug in. Or you could be introspective, especially if you screwed it up, and say sorry and get things going in a different direction. The humility from the leader, I think, can set a tone as well. You agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think I mentioned this, but leadership behaviors determine the culture of your organization. So if you want a humble culture, your leader better be humble.
Yeah, well said. Talent wars. Oh my goodness, that jumps off the page. I think I've heard that, but the way you described it and tying talent wars, which to anybody who doesn't get it, because I got it the minute you said it, it means people are pulling at your best people, trying to get them to leave, and you're connecting talent wars to stay interviews, and then you've used science and you've formalized and made part of your organization the stay interview, which to me was a one-off. Hey, let's talk how you're doing. That's not what you're doing. You're taking it way further than that. I like how you said family meeting time. You did not need their input. You needed their support.
Yes. Yes. That was really important.
And then lastly, as we head out, teaching hospital. What a really great way to think about things. Really great way to think about it. I'm taking that with me. I'm going to use that with some of my emerging leaders. And it's just great language. You use great business language. Any last thoughts before we sign off?
I think teaching high school is so relatable. If you've watched any of the TV programs, we know what that means. Grey's Anatomy, set in Seattle. But no, I just really appreciate the time to get to know you better as well, and for you to have an interest in, what I've done, in my 30. I can't believe it's been 37 years that I've been working, but I actually have been working longer than that. We didn't talk about. Started working when I was 12, working in the berry fields, and just being recognized for being the hardest berry picker because I was very motivated to be able to make money to buy school clothes for myself. So again, when you start with humble beginnings, you just have that constant reminder that you have to retain that humility, because some of the best advice I got when I took this job, and again, one of my sponsors put together this cohort, which included former governors in Washington State, chiefs of staff, former head of Weyerhaeuser, et cetera. And he had me write a 180-day plan and present it to this group of people. Talk about being nervous, and so presented my 180-day plan to them to get feedback. And at the end of it, every one of them said, "What got you to this point will keep you there. Do not allow the system to change what you've done to be successful." And it was more about this being humble, engaging with people, supporting people. It's not about me. It's not about the boss. It's about the team. The boss does well when the team does well. So a lot of, that 180-day plan was really assessing the team and getting the right people. Collins calls it not only being the right people on the bus, but they need to be in the right seats on the bus. And so really taking that 180 days to make sure that I had the people on the team who could make sure that we were successful together.
Outstanding. Marcie Frost, thank you so much. You did a great job. We all appreciate opportunity to learn from you. Also, thank you to our outstanding producer, Daniel Link, Riley and Mark Byrne at Podigy Podcast, and to our outstanding research assistant, Alex Warner. See you next month on Together at the Top. Thank you so much for your time. Together at the Top thrives off listeners like you. To stay connected, follow our socials in the show notes and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll be releasing our show on the last Tuesday of every month. See you next time. At Nick Warner Consulting, we exist to coach and consult motivated professionals. I meet with you on Zoom in focused 90-minute sessions, working toward your goals and developing next-level business skill sets. My job is to add value to your organization and your career. To learn more, visit www.nickwarnerconsulting.com or call me directly at 916-765-3576.